Welcome back, young scholars. This is the second video on Dar al-Islam. The big questions you should be able to answer after watching this video are, first, what caused Islam to split shortly after Muhammad's death? Second, how was Dar al-Islam organized politically prior to 1450 CE? So let's tackle that first big question. What caused Islam to split shortly after Muhammad's death? In the last video, we learned about the life of the Prophet Muhammad. He dies around 630 CE, and shortly after his death, a dispute arises over who will succeed him as the subsequent leader of both the faith and this expanding empire. So a dispute arises upon Muhammad's death, and there are two prime candidates to take on this leadership or succession role. And those were Abu Bakr, who was Muhammad's close friend, and Ali, who was Muhammad's closest blood relative, was his cousin. So some Muslims wanted Abu Bakr, the close friend, to become the next leader of this emerging Islamic empire, while others wanted the power to remain within the bloodlines, and so they preferred Ali. And this split over who should become the emerging leader of the Islamic faith ultimately will lead to the major division in the Islamic faith between the Shia and the Sunni. So the Shia and the Sunni. So this is the origin of the major split between the Sunni, who were the supporters of Abu Bakr, who was Muhammad's close friend, and the Shia, who were the backers of Ali, who wanted power to stay within the family bloodlines. A few things to know about the Sunni and Shia. Sunni is the majority. So today about 80% of Muslims are within the Sunni branch of Islam. About 20% are in the minority Shia branch. And this is not unusual to see divisions within a faith. We've already talked about in Buddhism, divisions within Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism, or in Christianity between Eastern Orthodox Christians and Catholics. As religions spread, divisions arise over the nature of the faith or how that faith should be practiced. Why is this important today, this division between Sunni and Shia Islam? If you look at a modern map showing where the majority of Sunni and Shia live, you can see that there's only a few countries where the minority group, which is the Shia Muslims, represent a majority of the population. And one of those countries is Iran. Another one over here actually is Syria. And so Iran and Syria don't necessarily have a whole lot of friends in the Islamic world because of the nature of these divisions. There's also a large population of Shia Muslims in Iraq. And so when the United States went into Iraq, a civil war quickly emerged as a result of the power vacuum that was created by the United States military presence in this region, and that ultimately would be filled by various warring factions, including the formation of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, also known as ISIS, which attempted to form a state up here in the northern part of Iraq and the eastern part of Syria. Be aware, the majority of Muslims are Sunni. They control states like Saudi Arabia, Turkey. Ultimately, Abu Bakr emerged as the chosen first leader of the Islamic empire. So he becomes the first caliph. So a caliph is a ruler of an Islamic empire. He holds both political and religious power and significance in the Islamic faith. And so when we're talking about an Islamic leader, we refer to that person as a caliph. When we refer to the state, we refer to that state as the caliphate. How was Dar al-Islam organized politically prior to 1450 CE? The history of the Islamic Empire can divide it into two major dynasties, or caliphates, Islamic states. First, we have the Umayyad, which was a family that ruled from 661 to 750 CE. And this was during the period of the initial Islamic expansion. And then we have the Abbasid Caliphate from 750 CE to 1258 CE. So you'll notice our course, AP World History Modern, starts in the year 1200 CE. So what can you guess is happening to the Abbasid Caliphate around 1200 CE? It's starting to collapse. And so we'll come back to that in just a second. But that's the really critical thing that you need to understand about these Islamic states in the period from 1200 to 1450. So let's start with this initial expansion of the Islamic Empire by the Umayyad Caliphate, stretching all the way from India all the way over into northern Africa and up into Spain. And it was the Umayyad Caliphate that conquered the Holy Land. It includes the modern-day country of Israel and the state of Palestine. And so this is when, in this initial expansion, or in the late 600s, early 700s, is when Muslims started to control that area. Now, the Umayyads were very tolerant of non-Muslims. There were Jews, there were Christians, there was a large Zoroastrian population living within the boundaries of this emerging Islamic empire, and the Umayyads generally were tolerant, and that's consistent with the approach that Muhammad had taken, referring to non-Muslims as people of the book. So non-Muslims were allowed to continue to practice their religion. They were not forced to convert to Islam. However, there was a system that was put in place to encourage conversion, and that was a tax that was imposed on non-Muslims called the jizya. So they encouraged conversion from Christians and Jews and other groups. They required them to pay a tax, and that encouraged many of them to end up simply converting to the religion so they wouldn't have to pay this tax. Now, with the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate, we see the emergence of another strong Islamic centralized state called the Abbasid Caliphate. So the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads in 750 CE, and the Abbasid Caliphate is considered the golden age of the Islamic Empire. But eventually, after 400 or 500 years, the Abbasid Caliphate will also collapse and fragment right around the year 1200 CE. So right as this course is starting, the Abbasid Caliphate fragments. And these new Islamic states are going to emerge, most of which are dominated by various Turkic peoples. Now, let's talk about the Turks. Who were the Turks? The Turks were originally pastoral nomads that migrated west from Central Asia. And they brought with them these Turkic languages. So that's one of the unique features that distinguishes Turkic people from Arab people, is Arab people speak Arabic, and Turkic people speak these Turkic languages. You can see a map showing Central Asia here where the Turks originated, and they spread down here, and many Turks ended up in this region right here, which at the time was referred to as Anatolia. Today we refer to it as the modern-day country of Turkey. There's another country right here on the other side of the Caspian Sea that also has Turk in its name. That is Turkmenistan. Now you'll see some Turks actually, instead of going west, some Turks ended up going north and ended up in Siberia. And there's some Turkic language that are still spoken up in that region as well. This map is a map showing the languages of the modern Middle East. We can see Turkic-derived languages in this area where the Turks ended up migrating and spreading, whereas we see Arabic, the Arabian Peninsula, and then ultimately spreading into North Africa. In terms of the Turkic kingdoms and empires that you should be aware of, as we say, this Abbasid Caliphate fragmented, and there were various empires and kingdoms that formed in its place. So one of them was the Seljuk Empire. Another one was the Mamluks and the Sultanate in Egypt. Another one was the Delhi Sultanate in India. We already talked about the Delhi Sultanate briefly in a video covering South Asia. And then finally we have the Ottoman Empire, and that's the one that you're going to have to be most familiar with, the Ottoman Turks, and we'll spend more time on that in a later unit. So Turkic kingdoms and empires in Dar al-Islam included these different Turkic kingdoms and empires, including the Seljuks, the Mamluks, and the Delhi Sultanate in India. Now let's talk about each one individually. So the Seljuk Empire was an empire that formed kind of in the tail end of the collapse of the Abbasid Caliphate. The Seljuks were Turks who had converted to Islam. So the Turkic people were originally practicers of an animistic style of religion, but as they migrated into this region of the Middle East, they convert to the religion of Islam. They are led by a sultan. That's the name of the leader, an Islamic ruler. And so we refer to sometimes these Islamic states as sultanates. They reunified the caliphate, the kind of collapse of the Abbasids, which included at the time Persia, which is right here, this region, which includes the modern day country of Iran, and also Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. That's what Mesopotamia means, which is this region in the modern day country of Iraq. So they reunify that caliphate in Persia and Mesopotamia. The Seljuks are going to fight with the Byzantines over control of this Anatolian peninsula, which is the modern day country of Turkey. And that's the thing that ultimately prompted the First Crusades. Remember, the Byzantine emperor called up and requested help from the Catholic Pope, and the Catholic Pope sent crusaders over in order to try and recapture the Holy Land down here from Muslims. And as the Seljuks expanded, they are going to bring Islam to this Anatolian peninsula. And that's why today, the modern day country of Turkey, the vast majority of people practice Islam. So in addition to the Seljuk Empire, we have the Mamluk Sultanate. So the Mamluk Sultanate from about 1250 to 1517, a very important Islamic state, and it includes the modern day country of Egypt. But notice the Mamluk Sultanate also includes the Holy Land up here, and also stretches down here into the Arabian Peninsula, and it includes the important cities of Mecca and Medina. So the Mamluks were an army of Turkic slaves. Lest you think slavery is always bad, sometimes slaves become the rulers of states. So in the case of the Mamluk, they were just an army of Turkic soldiers and slaves who convert to Islam. They then gain power in this state right here, the Mamluk Sultanate. They expand across Egypt and the Holy Land. They're going to defeat the Crusaders and the Mongols in battle. They're ferocious, fierce warriors, and they're going to ultimately be one of the reasons why the Mongol Empire stops expanding. A third Turkic group you should be familiar with over here in South Asia is the Delhi Sultanate. So from 1206 to 1526, when we talked about South Asia, in particular India, what was the dominant religion in that region? And the answer is Hinduism. It's the Turks that spread Islam into northern India and introduce Islam into that region. In the case of the Delhi Sultanate, you have a Muslim minority ruling over a Hindu majority in that area of northern India. In the initial conquest, they're going to destroy various Hindu temples and shrines. They are going to create, sometimes it's referred to as Indo-Islamic architecture. So we see certain features that reminds us of Islamic architecture, like this minaret here, where Muslims issue the call to prayer, but we also can see some more traditional Indian-style architecture here. So the sultans of the Delhi Sultanate, they varied between taking an approach of intolerance, where they would destroy Hindu temples, and also acceptance, inclusion, and the assimilation of these two different cultural traditions. So when it comes to the Delhi Sultanate, sometimes they were destroyers of the existing Hindu culture, sometimes they were assimilators of that culture. So after watching this video, you should be able to answer these two big questions. What caused Islam to split shortly after Muhammad's death? You should be able to explain how Dar al-Islam was organized politically prior to 1450, specifically understanding how there was the collapse of the Abbasid Caliphate right around 1200 when the course is beginning, and how that empire was replaced by various Turkic states, including the Seljuk Empire, the Mamluks, and the Delhi Sultanate. In the next video, we'll pick up on some Islamic innovations. As always, thanks for watching.